Welcome to episode number 8 of Chickpea Powered, the podcast for vegan athletes and entrepreneurs who want to change the world. Today's episode features Jeremy Haynes, high-level entrepreneur, vegan CEO of Megalodon Marketing, a digital agency dedicated to personality brands. Man, it is such a blessing to be able to have him on the show. I don't want to talk too much. I really want him to share exactly what he's got for us today, man. You're crazy if you don't listen to the interview all the way to the end. Listen, I suck at intros. Okay, I've tried them no matter how I try. Like it's always a struggle for me. So listen, I know you're an amazing Megalodon Marketing big CEO. How about you tell us something that no one knows about you?
Yeah, absolutely. So number one, I think a lot of people have no clue how truly entrenched into consciousness I am. Like when it comes to studying like energy and trying to, I use words like symmetry and harmony a lot. I really don't think people understand in marketing and just in life for everything that I do as an entrepreneur and just as I do as a person and as a man, as I continue to grow and become more wise, everything I try to do is just to become more harmonious and become more symmetrical and aligned and less in conflict with everything around me that exists. So I don't think a lot of people can really appreciate that about me yet. I don't really expect a lot of people to, but you know, good question.
Nice, like it. And maybe starting off directly into veganism, do you remember a specific moment, like an aha moment, where you decided, man, I gotta go vegan?
Yeah, so I was in Los Angeles where I split live. My girlfriend lives in West Hollywood. I have an office out there in Beverly Hills, and the people there, I said this very commonly when I was there, and it proves true where I'm at now in Miami as well, that it is so easy to become a vegan in Los Angeles because almost every singular food that you could imagine as a non-vegan food, I mean all the way down to steaks and burgers and like whatever your favorite chicken recipe is over to any dish you could imagine has been made into a vegan dish, including pastries, cakes, all the bad stuff you could be eating too. But the specific moment, to be quite frank, was just I became aware of like everything. I didn't understand that food was so important until there was like, I don't know, the fucking 7th or 9th nutrition book I've read. Okay. And it just finally clicked. I didn't grow up in an educated place for nutrition. So I grew up in Ohio. So my mom was like feeding me freezer food and she was babysitting a bunch of other kids. So I didn't have any of that. In school, they didn't really focus on what you could actually eat, like what recipes there were that were healthy. It was just, you know, it was Ohio, it was factory workers. So it was up to me to self-educate. I didn't really self-educate until I started getting money. And then, you know, I started getting money. I made a lot more money, and it enabled me to afford a nicer lifestyle for myself. Mm-hmm. But just because you make money doesn't mean you're going to get a nicer lifestyle, because you still have to be educated on what it truly takes to be a higher performance person and to enable yourself to have more time. The one moment, dude, I was just stressed. All that data I just explained clicked at one time. Yeah. And I was just like, I need to make a monumental diet change. My girlfriend started feeding me vegan food for 6 days straight. She's, you know, like I said, it was pretty normal. Didn't really seem too crazy. I immediately had less bloating. You know, I had a lot of immediate effects for sure. I can go into detail on that, but moral of the story is, the one moment was just, you know, I kind of want to be a much higher performance person. Everything I've ever read or studied, and every person I've ever studied that's higher than me in life on the scale that I'm trying to get to and the magnitude that they perform at, they all recommend going vegan. So I just tried it out. I don't let myself hold myself back.
Awesome. And going back to Wes Knight's interview, I remember you were talking about the process and using the metaphor of the baby, saying how a baby takes time to grow and you can't just expect them to start running like that. But
yeah, very true.
It seems that with veganism, you just were able to click like that. So how do you distinguish when you're able to click and just make the pivot point and really take the time to make a process, if you get the question?
I would elaborate on that a little more. Yeah. And I would say that when you choose to start building a new skill or changing a diet or, you know, getting into a new fitness routine, you don't just automatically become a master, you know? Mm-hmm. You're not just automatically pivoted, you know, and it doesn't just automatically happen. When I made the choice and then took the first literal action, it's not like there's a whole all of a sudden like Jack in the Box that I opened up like, poof, you know, everything changed. No, dude, it's like I woke up the next day when I said I want to be a vegan, it's like I still love bacon, steaks, like butter, like all this stuff. Like it's like I like these are your habits, right? So your keystone habits are the things that are the underlying habits that are really, really subconscious and I want to say more hardwired and really tough to overcome. Below the age of 25, we have the benefit of being able to rewire our neuroplasticity pretty easily just from desirable change. And we leverage that change from like new information or new performance or whatever we desire that can help us achieve our goals. After 25, kind of sucks because you have to have fear, pain, suffering, or some kind of monumental forced shift that radically occurs typically from a source of pain. So it could be you end up having a heart surgery when you're like 50 and your doctor's like, well, let's be real, Bob. You've been eating like dog shit your entire life and it's time to make a diet change and start eating vegetables in the first time in 30 years. You know, and that's really hard for Bob because in that moment, it's like all of his underlying habits that have been ingrained for like 5 decades, you know, like think of all the advertising. So, for example, lobbying. People have no clue just because they can't think this big. Even when I say what I'm about to say, some soft, chump-minded person might hear what I'm about to say and literally be like, oh, no, that doesn't happen. Just because their brain can't actually perceive the level of business that transacts beyond what they can comprehend in a fucking dollar store exchange or something. So the perspective that I'm about to say with lobbying is massive. So get this level of business first. There are people who just have a perspective that they need others to have, but they can't go advertise like a company, okay? So the company who, let's say, sells the chickens and all of the warehousing and benefits on the land or whatever is the most money being made in a particular area of business, that person might make more money than the farmer, than the distributor, than – what if that same person, though, owns 75%? Or in the Rockefellers' case, for example, they owned 90% of the oil all the way up to 1911. 90% of the entire oil market was owned by the Rockefellers to 1911. And then the government came in. That's when we started creating monopoly laws. And what happened in that moment, it's not bad, really. It distributed that 90% into different companies, which the guy still owned, but they were now different companies that were all smaller, so competition could exist again. But the competition was really like his own companies, now co-owned by other people as well. So what happens when you get to these massive levels, think about this. The Rockefeller then becomes buried behind enormous companies. So to the extremely small-minded turd who's trying to perceive what I'm saying, it's like they can't see like the big heavies. And in this case, I'm not saying that there's a Rockefeller in every scenario. But let's say somebody makes $100 million, or nowadays even $1 billion to $5 billion. Really is not a lot of money in a business. Different people on the Forbes 100 float in between being a billionaire and like 50 billion now. There will be a trillionaire within our lifetime. And I'm talking from the age of 23 right now as a millennial. So the moral of the story is the people that are behind the scenes, they're going to pay enormous amounts of money to people that, keep in mind, they don't have a company to advertise, and their companies that they co-own, they can advertise somewhat, but hear me out. It's much more effective to be able to control the mind of people with what digital marketers would look at with like black hat SEO or black hat digital marketing, which are some like dirtier tricks and tactics, like, for example, protesting particular places or in the news if you own distribution channels of some kind. Or it's very easy when you're an entrepreneur and you're aware of the PR industry, you can just pay $2,500 to $5K, maybe $10K tops to get into the biggest distribution channels. I can literally for under about $2,000 put something in ABC, NBC, CBS, and Fox and publish it with whatever headline, whatever article, and whatever image I want. So the perspective that when you own those things, it's all just lobbying, you know. So anyway, hear me out. Back to us as entrepreneurs and our diets. When I became aware of the big level of business that went on, and then my attention was drawn to the food industry specifically, there's all types of propaganda. And Netflix you can go watch. I mean, they have that Rotten movie now. They have what's the big one that was a big kicker?
Cowspiracy.
Yeah, that's a good one. There's
what the hell?
That was a big one for everybody. There's all types of stuff that you can go watch. I personally watch a lot on YouTube. I read a lot of books, but then my girlfriend is big into the movies and stuff like that. So anyway, moral of the story is when I was able to connect what I already know to that specifically, and then ask myself, okay, every high-level person I've ever studied is a vegan now. Like, everything around me makes it really easy to become a vegan. Everybody that I'm seeing when I just observe that lobbying perspective is definitely lobbying, and that doesn't make me have confidence in everything I've ever learned. That's the hard part for people, is they don't have – that's the reason I explained all that. They don't have the comprehension to unlearn what they've already learned, because you can't see why you would need to unlearn it. So that's when I had a big kick of trying to transition to becoming a vegan. And immediately that leverage, whenever I would have hard moments like, oh, I want to have, like, do I want cheese on my fries or something like that? It's like, no, dude. It's like, think about the enormous amount of money that was spent to get you to think that cheese is the thing. In my head, I was like, why do I want cheese? It's like, sometimes I would be like, oh, there's additional protein in like milk or cheese or this particular meat source. Lo and behold, every single vegetable has an enormous amount of protein. Dude, you can have hemp seeds, edamame, cauliflower, broccoli, asparagus, fucking pumpkin seeds. There's so many literal things that I thought, this is the crazy part. Growing up, I don't even think I was told that those things had protein in them, because that's what I'm trying to explain, guys. Lobbying puts the money not to tell you that those things are wrong. They've always told you eat vegetables and eat good, but the diet. Think about this. Think about the recommended diet, okay? So if what's called the CDC, which is a giant auditing board where corporations are kind of checked, it's like the checks and balances systems for making sure that large lobbying things like aren't happening inside of corporations and politics, big thing. But a lot of dirty things do happen, and a lot of things slide by. And a lot of politicians, a lot of people are paid off to ensure that pyramid, for example, in the United States that's recommended for our different diets, these things have horrible things for you comparatively to just not telling you all of the other stuff. So it's not just a reframing of your mind you have to do. It's just that you're uneducated in an area. So they told you things about this that aren't necessarily wrong, right? There's just things that far outweigh the benefits of this by so much that it's incomparable if you would compare the two, that's where being a vegan comes in or being a vegetarian comes in. It's just that once you see how truly outweighed it is, just in an educated way, for so many things that you probably didn't ever know, that's when the dots can connect. When you have all those conditioned thoughts that the other side is also putting into your head, think about this, like, think about the people who are just like, oh, you're a vegan, like, you just eat grass. Like, what the fuck? You don't want to eat, like, I don't want tomatoes, sliced tomatoes for every meal. It's like, well, hear me out. In the middle part of America and different parts of the world, absolutely. You might go to a restaurant and you might say you're a vegan and they might have no clue what the fuck that means, And that sucks for you because they might mistreat you in those moments if you're not educated enough to be able to order something that does supplement. It's like becoming a sovereign man or a sovereign woman in a sense. You have to become much more educated. Like, once you become a vegan, dude, supplements, taking B vitamins, taking iodine, not forgetting about the little things that you are now missing. You're actually missing a specific neurochemical. I'm trying to remember. It starts with an A. It's like fucking 10 syllables long. It's not dopamine. It's not serotonin. It's the other one literally required for happiness. And the perspective. Yes.
Something like that?
The perspective is that you completely lose key nutrients, but you're not going to know that because there's not really a key source of education that's been created. There's not like a library of veganism. Don't get me wrong, though. There are extreme people out there that will educate you and give you diets and help you understand all this stuff, but I wouldn't recommend one particular source. I get my data from everywhere, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay, awesome. And going back to your question about education, man, I ask people like, hey, what's your tip on influencing other people and inviting them into the vegan community? And oftentimes they say, well, you have to look good, you have to have the glowing skin, you have to show them, man, I've got muscles. But I'm not always satisfied with that answer. I feel that it doesn't have the impact that I want. So what's your approach in sharing veganism in your life?
Dude, I've learned at the age of 18 when I first started getting into like real life, if you will, that if you attempt to shift or control other people's actions, like becoming a vegan, for example, think about the responsibility that you're taking on just in that thought of I desire to change somebody else's perspective, because the depth of change that's required, as I just went over. Think about the leverage one has to create inside of themselves. It's like the reasoning I created was my reasoning. Nobody else gave me that reasoning. It's like that was my reasoning, and that if I was going off somebody else's reasoning, I probably wouldn't do it, right? It has to come from my desire of change. And so I don't necessarily go to seek creating the change in others per se, because it's a self choice, and things that are outside of my control, especially like that, would just create unnecessary stress. It would create unnecessary open cycles that, would require my time, energy, and attention. And my time, energy, and attention are precious. They're much more, usable and valuable in other ways beyond just trying to change people to becoming a vegan. I point people when they're like, "Hey, how'd you lose so much weight?" Or how are you staying up like 17 hours in a day and getting 5 hours of sleep comfortably? Or how are you transitioning to doing like all these high performance things consistently? Why do you always look like you're on like 6 cups of coffee? Why don't you drink coffee? That's when people have interest in any specific area of something that's come as a result of being a vegan. That's when I just say, hey, it just comes from being a vegan. But I quickly acknowledge right away, I'm like, but I'm not the kind of vegan to like push it on you. I will answer questions about it if you genuinely want to know, but I don't want to change your perspective. And then I find people, as soon as I say that, will naturally become much more open if they're genuinely interested to ask the questions that they might have, to create that self-interest. Because if we force our perspective onto people, we won't be able to see what could be the possibility to help them make a transition.
Okay. Nice question. Nice answer. I like it. I like that. And maybe going back to like sustainable entrepreneur, because you're a high level entrepreneur, like you said, man, you make a lot of money. And I feel like looking at others, it's really easy to start just focusing on the money. And now as a vegan entrepreneur, as a sustainable entrepreneur, how are you able to incorporate that into your business without taking advantage of people and taking, again, lobbying, if you get the question?
Yeah. I don't necessarily understand the question, but yeah, I would explain it like a little differently. The perspective I think I understood was that being a high level performance entrepreneur, like how do I incorporate that as I'm also what?
Yeah, exactly.
So I find it necessary to even, call yourself a high performance entrepreneur. You have to be able to really ingrain a perspective of successful habits, self-improvement, improving your environment around you, improving everybody around you, helping bring people's perspective to something that can improve them matters. In my life, I lead by example. I don't manage people by telling. I just lead people to successful results, if you will. So from my perspective as an entrepreneur, I find that it was a necessary performance boost that I wouldn't have been able to achieve otherwise. And I would never have been able to tell or even come close to acknowledging that it'd be a change that I needed if I didn't just try it.
Okay, like that. And man, I just feel like going down the rabbit hole, but I respect your time, man. And I just want to ask you maybe one last question.
Yeah, absolutely. What's up?
Sure. So you talked about 5 hours of sleeping, and man, I hear all the time, like, I play the sleeping game. I try to sleep 4 hours, 5 hours. I did it for a week, then it didn't work anymore. And I feel just it's a horrible approach until I heard that you were doing it on West Knight's podcast. So I'm really interested in your approach and how you're able to sleep 5 hours a day.
Yeah, so my energy, it comes at different times. So depending on when you would find me as a person, I would sleep at different times, different intervals, depending upon my energy levels, depending on my diet. Being a vegan, I find that my energy's through the roof. If I wanted to, I feel like I could stay up longer than that, but for the perspective of regenerating my body and not just pushing myself mentally to then disrespect my temple, if you will, I ensure that I get 5 hours of sleep because my REM cycle is about 2.5 hours. So if I go to bed in a very tired state, I'll sleep maybe 6 hours, maybe 7 hours on 1 day a week basis or an every other day a week basis. When I usually go to bed, I don't ever sleep with alarms. I wake up. More of the story is my sleep gets shorter or a little longer depending upon my REM cycles that are necessary for me to get the amount of recharge I need from sleeping. I find 2 REM cycles are necessary. No way I could sleep like 2.5 hours and then wake up and then go do what I need to do and then sleep another 2.5 hours later in the day. Maybe at one point in my life I try that, but for now, I just, sleep is so critical. Sleep's so necessary. And I don't try to skimp myself. Like I'm not pushing 5 hours just because I want to sleep for only 5 hours. At one point in my life, from sleeping 8 hours, just from being told to sleep 8 hours, sometimes pushing 10 in younger ages, when you just realize how much there is to do, I think your own mind, naturally wakes you up to go do what you need to do and acquire what you want to do, especially when you have the confidence to do these things. So as I continue growing in my passion and especially on times when I'm in key parts of a mission or achieving a particular objective in business or in my personal life, I find that I'm even more enthused just to, sleep less, not out of the fact that I desire to stay up longer, but out of the fact my body needs less recharge because my body has more energy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like the approach of not limiting yourself. Like a lot of people in the bodybuilding world, they limit their diet, they limit. But I like the way you bring it up and optimizing and just saying it's natural for you and you were able to optimize.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. Constant data measurement is key for this kind of perspective to make sense for people, because without the data, without really being able to observe your diet, there's a website, for example, it's called myviome.com, and it's owned by that Najeen. It's owned by the billionaire Indian gentleman who also owns a few different space companies. He's really into like space rocks and meteors and asteroids and all that stuff. He has a big private collection. Anyway, this guy came out with this gut test where when you take it, you essentially just do a blood draw and then you send it in and they test your biome, or your biome is what it's called. And the moral of the story is you're getting back a long sheet, and there's tons of people that do this in local areas just based on blood tests as well, where you're essentially looking at a list of foods in the different cooked states that they're in as well, and what you may have micro allergens to, or what is not appropriate to eat during different seasons of the year, because you have a draw that gets pulled out of you. You actually lose energy when you eat certain plants and vegetables around certain times of year. You can read a good book called Plant Paradox. It goes much more into depth on that. But the moral of the story is I constantly find that it's important to be able to observe this. This is much more than just like a dietary change. It's much more of like a lifestyle supplement that I think is required, once again, just to perform in any way, shape, or form.
Okay. Awesome. Like it. And how can people connect with you?
Pretty simple. My Instagram is just my name, just at Jeremy, Jeremy. My Twitter, Facebook, everything else is the Jeremy Haynes. But you guys can also just go to jeremy.expert on the internet. It has a URL to every single way you could connect with me.
Awesome, man. Well, Jeremy, thank you so much again for dropping by. I really appreciate your time.
Oh, yeah, appreciate it, Oliver. And thank you for doing this podcast, man. Appreciate you getting the word out. Thanks to all the listeners as well. Appreciate everybody who's stopping in. And, whatever you end up doing, just do it in an educated way.